I am here with Pete and we're talking all things propaganda. Now, Pete, the end result of propaganda seems to be convincing people that they want to live in a prison. For countries surrounding Russia, citizens are being convinced that they should return to the rule of a nation that their ancestors fought to free themselves from. And for Australia, we are being convinced that freedom is dangerous and that living in a totalitarian state is the only way to be safe. You know, we've started jumping at our own shadows and we've got this fear in our minds created purely from nonsense we see online. Now, I find it interesting that we have these foreign interference laws and an e-safety commissioner issuing takedown orders, and yet I don't see how any of these measures would put a dent in, let alone combat, the true danger of propaganda. Pete, are the censorious rules being implemented on us domestically helping or hindering the age of true propaganda?
Yeah, we've lost a sense of proportion. So we've decided to control what is kind of inconsequential in the scheme of things, but that suits somebody's domestic political agenda or somebody's need to risk manage some issue out there, at the same time that we're turning a blind eye to the actual strategic threats that are posed by Russian or Chinese propaganda directed at our society. And they're very, very active attempts to basically undermine our democratic values. So it really is time for our leaders to step back and say, okay, do I wheel the e-commissioner out there to basically, effectively clean up a little issue in media terms, because that's what it is. It's a tick-a-box exercise in terms of media management. Or do I confront the fact that, I actually have genuine strategic opponents in the world who want to undermine the rules-based order, which we really, really thrive on, and actually work with our allies to combat that kind of propaganda at the strategic level. Yeah, it's time to put away the kind of media management imperatives and pick up the imperatives of leadership.
They also need to realise that they don't need to censor and remove content. One of the most dangerous videos that entered our world just at the beginning of COVID were those videos coming out of China, which were manufactured to make people believe that this virus would make you collapse on the street. Now, they didn't need to remove those videos. They could have just painted them immediately as propaganda and they would have had no power whatsoever. That would be a better role for the e-commissioner to determine that kind of thing than sit around saying, hey, that trans photograph, we don't like you criticising that. That's not really a good role for them to have. But ultimately, Pete, propaganda is about war. It is a wartime creation, and while Australia is unlikely to end up engaged in a hot war with Russia, unless, of course, we meet Russian forces in the Pacific if things go a bit south with China, but Europe is certainly in danger of meeting Putin's forces in the future if they don't tread very carefully. What would be the point of Russia interfering in a distant nation like Australia? Because I hear conservative and libertarian commentators saying, oh, why would Putin be sending us propaganda? But surely there is a reason behind that behaviour.
Oh, I think that basically, we're one of many countries on the general list that of countries that Russia sees as opposed to its interests, starting from the United States and working your way through Europe, including Australia. We may not see the world as divided between democracies and authoritarian countries, stupidly may not see the world that way, but they certainly see the world that way. I don't think that Russia is at all naive or at all lacking in purpose when it comes to pursuing its authoritarian agenda. Whereas we in the West, in liberal countries, are kind of trying to wish that conflict away, sometimes by giving the Ukrainians a bunch of money to fight it for us, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is we're actually being a little bit ignorant to the risks that are posed to us by the rise of a new global authoritarianism.
Well, look, a big question here to finish on. I'm going to ask it because I know you're so passionate about this topic and you've written about it many times. Is the West being tricked into cheering on the Russian takeover of places like Crimea and Ukraine, with tales about US money laundering and corruption? And Where do you see this conflict going? Do you think that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for Ukraine, or is part of the fight to save Ukraine going to revolve around the West getting its stuff together and focusing on what the true goals of the geopolitical sphere is? Because at the moment, I feel like Australia is just being pushed around a chessboard by various powerful players rather than actually playing the game properly.
Look, the Ukrainians were always going to continue the fight regardless of whether the West was supporting them or not. You know, for them, it's existential. It's about their land. It's about their culture. It's about their future. Even if they were down to literally to their last rifle, they would continue to fight. And they would find ways to do that in a wily, technologically savvy way, just as they are now. You know, they blew up 80 Russian naval craft, essentially using gaffer tape and glue to build naval drones. So they're always going to do that. But whether they win or not is probably a factor of the degree to which the West decides that it has a stake in their victory. And I suggest that that is a real stake. You know, Russia is out to basically destroy our way of life. And, you know, whether it does that through propaganda means, whether it does it through, pitting the left against the right in our societies, whether it does so actively, through other forms of hybrid warfare is another question. But, whilst we distract ourselves with, our little debates about, identity or, whether or not, there should be this kind of bathroom or that kind of bathroom, we're actually missing the bigger picture here. And that is the founding principles of our society are at risk if we don't actually stand up to Russia in a serious way.
Well, it's bizarre because you've got two communist empires, China and Russia, deciding who's going to rule the world between them. And yet we've got the US and the Western world who used to hold the gate keys of peace and democracy around the globe, and they no longer believe that they deserve to be in charge of the world. They've convinced themselves ideologically that they're evil and they should just hand over the world to the tyrants and let everybody else, work it out and try and survive, which is going to be a disaster for everybody. Look, a final question here. Wartime reporting last century was an exercise in propaganda. Propaganda designed to encourage the population to survive and win, usually in that order. But the West lacked the will and the technology to stop people from spreading news and information over the dinner table, all through their social groups. They couldn't stop a soldier wandering over the border and saying, hey, that was a crazy fight we just had. That was out of their control. Now, even at the height of censorship, they would never dream of being able to stop the press from reporting and stop people from talking. This is the first time in history that Western governments have the technology required to not only monitor the population, but to adequately punish them. We've got Scotland's new censorship law applying to private conversations, including those on encrypted chat services. And we've got digital ID in the social credit score, where we face the same future of China, where people could lose access to society if they say the wrong thing. How dangerous is propaganda in a world, if it should come to pass, where basically you could lose your entire livelihood for saying the wrong thing? Is that a frightening future, and is there a way out of it?
Look, I have members of my family who sat in Russian concentration camps in the Gulag. They were convicted for the fact, in one case, for being a poet. Basically writing poetry about very esoteric themes, romantic themes, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't political stuff. It wasn't necessarily Ukrainian nationalist stuff. It was simply, this person was incarcerated because they were seen as a free spirit in a society that had no room for free spirits. So for me, this is quite personal. My family has experienced what it means to live in a society where all the thoughts must be controlled and monitored, where all the communication is a product of the state. I think you're right. I think that other people like you are right to bang that gong loudly, to say, why have you precluded this possibility in our own society? Don't be naive about what can happen when people in power want to control that power exclusively for themselves. And whether it's propaganda coming out of Russia or China, or whether or not it's propaganda that's generated for the gain of particular exclusives here or particular elites here, we have to be really, really dubious and careful about it.
Well, I agree with you there. I also think it's harder to control a population if they start screaming straight away than it is to wait until we're all controlled by whispers, because then you've got no power at all. But look, Pete, where can people catch up with what you're writing and follow your work? Because you are an avid producer of content, particularly commentary on Ukraine. Where are you?
Look, Medium is a forum where I print a lot of stuff. I'm obviously very pleased to be in Spectator Australia every once in a while, and that's great. Every once in a while, you'll find me in places as diverse as The Guardian, believe it or not, and the Sydney Morning Herald and the Telegraph. I think I am one of the few people who has published in that wide array for some reason. But look, I do believe strongly in the world of ideas and the exchange of ideas. And it's great that there are programs like this that do so as well. Again, our risk factors go up when we don't have a lively exchange of concepts and ideas. They protect us.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you managed to sneak into The Guardian. They may not let you be published again if you start talking about freedom. That'd be it for them.
I said something nasty about a liberal. I think I said something nasty about a liberal government in one moment. So
that's okay. I think a lot of people are saying nasty things about Peter Dutton after his comments about e-safety censorship. So you're not alone on that one. But look, thank you so much for joining us here on Marshall Live.
No worries at all.